Hello, hi everybody. Welcome to Convo's Hangout. The theme today is the journey of a deaf refugee, and this is the sign we'll be using today. This is Melissa with Mel Mira, and I'm so thrilled to speak to the three of you. Hi everyone. Looking forward to really just hearing your experience and coming into the United States. But first, I'd like for the three of you to introduce yourselves. I'd like you to introduce your name, where you're currently living, and where your home country, where you came from. So we'll go ahead and we'll start with Bhawani. Okay, sure, you can start. Hi there, my name is Diutay Nyuon, and my sign name is the D across the forehead because you see these wrinkles. And I am from Ethiopia. And currently I am living in Nebraska. Nebraska. Yes, Omaha, Nebraska. That is the town I live in. I'm with my family. I've met with several deaf people and it's been good. That's great. Okay. Hi there, my name is Monu Chetri, and I was born in Bhutan. I'm a refugee from Nepal, and I moved here to the United States, and I'm currently in New York, and that was in 2011 when I came. Hi there, my name is Bhawani Dangal. This is my sign name, and I was born in Bhutan, and I moved from Nepal. I am a refugee, and I moved to the America. I used to live in New Hampshire, but now I'm currently living in Pennsylvania. That's great. I'm so thrilled to meet the three of you. So I just recently learned the sign for refugee. The refugee, like this. Yep, refugee. Maybe some people don't know exactly what a refugee is and what the definition of a refugee is. Sure, go ahead. So a refugee is a person who has fled their country due to some protest problems. There are times when they need to save their lives in other countries. Then they will stay and they won't return due to fear. Thank you so much for explaining that. So the three of you, your journey in coming to the United States, did you feel that was easy or was that difficult? I'd like for the three of you to explain what your experience was when you came in to the United States from your home country. Manu, sure, go ahead. Well, as a refugee, what that's like, it's really hard and it's really sad what happens. Because I am a refugee and my parents had to stay behind at their village. The government came into the village and actually killed my parents. And my siblings were safe. They managed to escape. They were on foot. There was no vehicle. And they had to flee over to the next city. Then they met with a Catholic pastor and fled from Ethiopia. This is a sign name for Ethiopia and Kenya. It was very difficult path for them. In Kenya, the country is not comfortable. It's very sad there. Education is difficult. Housing is difficult. Clean water is not accessible. Same with food or a place to sleep. And a person just constantly would think negative about themselves, and worry with the fact that they may be murdered. So it's a very sad situation. Up until 14 years ago, it took that long. It was a 14-year process to come into the United States. And the reason why is because those that lived in the country entered a camp where they tried to steal from them, to kill them, and where they had to escape. It was very hard to find them. So we had to reach out to the United Nations and ask for support. But there were no resources for deaf refugees. That's really difficult. That's really, really tough process. Yeah. So until that process took place, then eventually flew into America. Some were hung, some were murdered, some were not able to live. So I just feel really sad due to these events. Your journey is a very tragic journey, and your goal to come to the United States was to have a better life. Now, Monu, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to you. Go ahead and explain a bit about what you wanted to share. So, a refugee's journey and the experience, what that looks like. For instance, if you never experienced sleeping without a bed, having to sleep on a blanket every night, when you're sleeping at night, not knowing what the next day is going to look like, because you don't have any accessibility to the weather report, to any news, or any emergencies. There's no accessibility to that information. And your loved ones, the ones who you care about, have been lost because there was no medical therapy available to them, medical or therapy available to them. Sometimes you'd have to walk through a forest, on foot, through the river, in the mountains. You would have to walk bare feet. And just imagine living in a camp for decades to come without any electricity. And yet you're feeling like, am I human? You question that. There are days when I cried. There are days when I felt cold, where I felt worthless, where I felt like I was living in the middle of a war. It was an awful place to be. The pain and the grief, having to have been forced to leave behind family, our property, being left to not know where my journey can begin as a refugee. That's what our journey looks like. And it's not because we're not aiming to be a refugee. It's because we were forced to be, fleeing our country due to war and having to work towards a better life coming here, for a better life, better education, and having to work hard. So that's why we moved this way. And we deserve that better life. I remember that you had told me that there was a refugee program set by the United Nations. And there is a program that would help and provide resources and support. Is that right? Yes. Bhawani, if you can say a little bit more about that. Yes, the UNHU, they would provide food, they would house us through camps, they would assist us in a program called the IOM, International Immigration. Now, I remember you had explained when you first arrived at the camp, right? There was a camp that was built to provide support and resources. Could you explain a little bit more about that camp and what that looked like? I'm going to go ahead and let Monu explain, and then move over to Bhawani and then Diutay. So when I was a refugee from Bhutan. And we were in the middle of a war. And eventually I moved over to Nepal. And there was a program which was supported by the United Nations that gave resources on basic education and housing. We were able to work. Whereas we know where you're able to work and thrive in the United States, I actually had to stay at camp for about 19 years. Sorry about that. No, that's okay. It's so cute. Go ahead, Manu. So though we had education, we didn't have any deaf schools, whereas the United States has their establishments as well as their interpreters. There was no Center for the Deaf or advocacy, which, excuse me, there was, but it's not the same as you would find here in America, right? It's different. Now, I'm just curious, with your experience being deaf, was it hard to communicate? Bhawani. Yes, I'd like to add on to what Manu just mentioned. So it was very hard to communicate because in education, there was no accessibility. And in 1996, they established sign language, but it was not formal sign language. It was just very basic language. So we would all get together there. And of course, the professor was oral. They would cover their mouth with a book. So it was really hard to learn. You know, there was no way to ask the teacher any questions. So how did you all work through that? Was that through gesture? Did you rely on pen and paper? Diutay. Sure, go ahead. So before I arrived at the camp, um, mind you, my English was not the best. I did not have any language. And I had to attend a school, a hearing school, but they would say that there was no deaf students and I would have to sit quietly because there was no language there. And then eventually the government introduced ASL because of the deaf Kenyans. There was a student from Kenya that attended Gallaudet, earned his PhD, came back to Kenya, and really encouraged for this language to be established. But it was very hard to get our hands on technologies such as computers. We had to rely on a blackboard. And the teacher's skill in sign language was not that good. So they would bring interpreters from the community for hospitals. But it was hard. It was hard because for deaf people, it was hard for them to have accessibility. They were left out. And the country did not support the deaf community. And some would be left to die, all because of communication. And the mental health and having to socialize was very hard. Eventually, they brought on instructors that taught sign language. But it was very hard to get food. The weather was extremely hot. It was awful weather.
And the way deaf people were treated compared to their hearing family members were not the same. It was just very hard. Up until moving to America, I have a different lifestyle. And for those who have the mind to and mindset to stay in America and to learn and possibly return back over to my home country. Right, you had mentioned that you had shared how coming to America has been a better experience. But what I'd like to ask for all of you is, when you first came to the United States, how did you feel? Did you feel excited? Were you scared? Was it different? So I'll go ahead and I'll start with Bhawani, and then Monu, and Diutay. So when I was on the plane and I landed in America, it was so overwhelming. I didn't know the rules. As a pedestrian, I didn't know how to get to my friend's house. I had to buzz them in. I had to speak into the speaker saying, I'm here. And but because I was deaf, I've never had to use that before. It was very different. Manu, if you want to add anything to that. When I first came to the United States, it was such a culture shock. It was different compared to where we grew up. We were at a refugee camp, and it was not the same as seeing all these buildings and all of these people. So again, it was a culture shock, and there was a lot of communication barriers. And I felt isolated. I had an experience of isolation for the first 6 months when I got here. I did not meet any deaf members from the community. And so I thought, no, there's no way. There's no way that there's not any deaf people here. I'm a signer. And that before coming here, that was something I was already challenged with. So some challenges that I faced was having to be placed into a second language class. They would speak to me. It would go right over my head. It caused me to be scared. I was worried about getting kicked out and returning. So I had to be very, very patient. But then eventually I found my identity. I found my community with the deaf community, and took baby steps in learning, though it was challenging. So the same goes with having to learn how to drive and work around the streets. It was just so awkward for me. I had to start all over by learning all of that. Diutay. So the first thing was the weather. The second thing was communication. And out in the community, I would see, at the camps, there were signals letting you know when a car was coming. But then for here, there was no signals. I wasn't able to tell if there was a car coming, or if there was a person running. They were not in the way. They would just run past you. And so it was sad. With the government, it's a lot more easier here in America. They wouldn't text, even though I'm deaf. Um, they still wouldn't communicate, and that caused a lot of worry for me. And the weather, how it snows. I've never seen that before. In 38 years, I've always been in hot weather. So when I came to America and I saw snow for the first time, I was afraid. And it made me feel very different. But as time came and I learned more about the weather, it's gotten better now. Communication with the deaf community, using video phones, having to use African sign versus ASL. I mean, Bhawani, it's hard. It's so hard, but it's one foot in front of the other until You feel that sense of success. So it's been better. Now I can drive. I have my license. I can go anywhere I like. I'm not having to rely on any support, so it feels good. I feel better. It's changed culturally. I am now an American. I like that you've gone through those different things with the weather. And when you mentioned that American people aren't as friendly, yeah, they're not as friendly. Oh, that really says a lot of difference in culture. It sure does. Now, being deaf and the deaf community here in the United States, do the three of you feel that the deaf community is welcoming? Are they supportive? So, from the deaf community, did you feel that they were welcoming or otherwise? And I'll go ahead and start with Monu. So the deaf community really treated us fairly. We don't want to be looked at any differently as refugees. We want support, to be treated equally. That's great. Yes, I'd like for all of us to work together to support one another. Now, do you feel that since you've been here and meeting other deaf members in the community, do you feel that they've been welcoming or not? You know, before, when I would see a deaf person, we were able to communicate to one another. They were very welcoming. And we would stay together. Because when you stay together, you're able to rise together. Knowing that they are willing to pass on information from one person to another. To really thrive off that relationship. So I'm sure that your support system from the deaf community also includes this organization that you're part of. You're part of a refugee organization, is that right? Yes. So we will be having a World Refugee Day. And that World Refugee Day is for what exactly? Could you share? So the United Nations established a World Refugee Day from 20 years ago, but it never included deaf refugees up until 2021. There are different experiences, presentations, you can play soccer, there's entertainment, and you can find more information on their website. That's great, cool. Now, why is it important for the deaf community, for those of us that are not refugees? But why is it important for us, the deaf community here in America, to support this big event? Do you mind sharing a little bit about that? Well, the reason why is because America, well, Bhawani had just recently mentioned that it's World Refugee Day. There were no deaf members included, but now that they are also including deaf refugees, you're having to think more in depth, to think about deaf communities outside of the United States and how they're living. So for the American deaf community, what they can do to help is to give any solution sharing that that they're deaf outside of America. For those who have fled their country and those that are living at refugee camps, once they're able to achieve coming into America, they can become successful. And that's to give them that encouragement. This is a strong organization. And to invite them and let them know that this is a safe space for both you and me. All right, Bhawani and Monu, when deaf members come to that event, are they able to, so for instance, because I'm not a refugee, is there any way that I could support you guys? And why do you need support? Share a little bit more about that. Yes, you got it. You have to be able to support. Manu, do you mind explaining a little bit more? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and let Manu explain. The reason why it's important is because you'll learn from us. You know, there is, it's for us, by us. There's, sure, that's fine. Go ahead, Manu. So I've learned, so you have to learn from us. And when returning to your state or to your city, you can find the support that you need from the deaf community. Maybe those who are left isolated, those refugees. This would be a great resource for them to find advocacy and return with better knowledge. It's been decades since have not met any friends. So I've been really looking forward to collecting with the deaf members. It's really a benefit, not only just to learn and educate yourself about this event, but it's also a great way to socialize. And being a deaf refugee, we're all able to get together and learn each other's language, culture, experience, to have that blend. And you're able to learn from one another. Yes, I agree. So for me, I feel like I have a better understanding of the refugee experiences. Now, I've heard of refugees in the past, and I am familiar with the program that's set in place. But now I have a better understanding about what the three of you have gone through and why it's important for me to be able to engage with deaf refugees and to really learn their experience and find that there's the support, the need of support to socialize and to learn rather than turning our backs to one another. And that's what it is that you're looking for, right? Since you came to the United States. Is that right? Yeah. Yep. So I came here for a better life, for a better education for my children. I've worked very hard to get to where I'm at. Are there any other comments that you would like to share for those that are watching us today? Or is there anything that you want to share that you'd like for them to know? Is that you? Sure. I'd like for people to know what it means to be a refugee and how they came about being in that situation, what to do. So when we get together and we learn together about the experience of a refugee and their stories, I want to share my life and the country that I came from and to why I came to America and what my goal is. So for those deaf Americans, I encourage for you all to come and learn and see what our experience was like. Refugees should be able to come and know that those people that have to flee, They like you. Thank you, Dayu. Bhawani, Monu, any last comments you want to make? So I'd like for all of you to know, of course, I am a refugee and I did move to America for a better life. But if you have any questions or you want to learn more about this, come directly to us. Ask us all the questions that you have so that way we can answer them. That way we can treat each other fairly and we can all feel equitable. I think that's it. Thank you. Bhawani, I feel the same. I feel the same sentiment. I'd like for us all to be equal, and I'd really like to thank everybody for tuning in. And I invite everybody to be a part of the World Refugee Day. In June, I think it's the 10th until the 13th, is World Refugee Day in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And in 2022, there will be a Deaf Refugee Conference, and you will have an opportunity to learn more about this. That's awesome. I really want to thank all of you for sharing your story. And I hope for those that are watching, will be more motivated to meet other deaf refugee members in the community and learn about their experiences. Because those experiences are so essential. And that is part of our deaf community here in the United States. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.